So, with a brand new 86-minute long double album coming out on October 18th, have British prog rockers Frost finally delivered an opus to match their titanic debut of Million Town, or is life in the wires a bloated mess that wasn't even worth defrosting? Guys, gals and non-binary pals, my name is Ian, this is Rhyme Signatures, and we are once again opening the lid on the best new releases in prog rock and metal. Back in my carefree university days when I was just getting into progressive rock properly and not just wistfully listening to whatever obvious hit songs from the old days were being played on the radio, I stumbled upon a little band called Frost and their eclectic debut album, Million Town. Now, I'll be real with you all, I forget how it came to me, I don't remember, but it doesn't really matter, does it? The important thing is how it made me feel, and how much I felt it changed the rules for me. It was brash, bold, and pushed out a sound I'd not really been exposed to before. There was a kind of, raw, uncompromising quality to it, and a strong lead given from the keyboards and the synth, which at the time was a nice palate cleanser for me to all the harder rock and metal I'd been surrounding myself with. Now, to this day, nearly 20 years later, I still consider Million Town to be one of the all-time best modern progressive rock albums, and I will crack it open quite regularly for a spin. So of course I've been following Frost's career with great interest, but the frustrating truth for me is that nothing they've done since has ever hit quite as hard as Million Town did. Now, don't get me wrong here. Experiments in Mass Appeal, Falling Satellites, and Day and Age are all very solid records, more than worth your time and effort. But the problem with starting your career at a genre-defining high is that it's almost impossible to go anywhere but down, even if we are only talking about minute decrements rather than any kind of genuine freefall. So here we are now in 2024 with Frost unleashing the prog rock rite of passage, I suppose, the fabled double album. And I was curious, was this going to be a career-topping highlight like Spock's Beard's Snow, or would it be a bloated, overrated hodgepodge of ideas like Pink Floyd's The Wall? Yes, I went there, I'm not sorry, it's an amazing single album hiding in the jacket of an unnecessary double one. That's my hot take of the day for you right there. Right, there's a lot of good to talk about on this album, so let's get stuck into the meat of things. As a double album, it comes as very little surprise that this is a full-bodied narrative concept album, and the press release used to describe it goes as such. The story revolves around the main character Niall, an aimless kid heading for a meaningless future in an AI-run world. He hears an old DJ talking on the ancient AM radio his mother once gave him, and decides to trace the source of the signal and find Livewire, to see if there's a better future out there. However, the all-seeing eye is less than impressed at this bid for independent thought, and fights back. Soon Nio finds himself pursued across the country by an outraged mob, as he tries to locate the home of Livewire and his freedom. In all seriousness, it gives me vibes of the likes of Rush's 2112 and, dare I say it, Dream Theater's The Astonishing, falling into that favourite subgenre of dystopian future where the government says music is bad and it all goes a bit Pete-tong for everyone involved. It's honestly a remarkably well-told story though, helped in no small part to lead songwriter and top dog Jem Godfrey's tasteful lyrics and rock-solid vocal delivery, which in truth has always been a big highlight and draw for me to Frost's music. Jem sounds as inviting and warm as ever on this album, his unique timbre feeling unchanged in the nearly 20 years since Million Town, and honestly, if anything, much like a fine wine, it is aging beautifully. There's this great focus on melody, on creating these big, sweeping soundscapes that give the bulk of the music this louder-than-life quality that elevates everything to sounding complex, layered and multifaceted in the best possible way. This is felt especially in opening banger Life in the Wires Part 1, following on from the brief intro track of Skywaving, which actually segues in nicely from the ending of the previous album, marrying the two into the same continuous narrative universe, which I'm quite a big fan of. And given the breadth of the music on offer here, it should come as very little surprise to anyone that there is a significant variety in the sounds and moods being displayed. Third track of this House of Winter gives the listener time to catch their breath a little with some chilled out, relaxing melodies before being thrust into a whirlwind of dazzlingly technical instrumental runs. The guitars from both Jem and John Mitchell really sing on this track and shows off that these old Brits can still shred with the best on the world stage. As a metal enjoyer though, as much as I do appreciate the dad rock stylings of Frost's principal sound, I have been thoroughly enjoying the darker, heavier moments on this album. Idiot Box feels like it can hold its own against old-school Symphony X at times, and the twin hit of School introducing the All-Seeing Eye and Propaganda off the second disc really do a great job of satisfying my need for gnarly riffage and darker atmospherics, tying in nicely to the dystopian nature of the overall narrative flow. And speaking of the second disc, I feel that's where the album comes alive. Whereas a lot of double disc albums really have to work to hold your attention after the first 40 to 50 minutes or so, it feels like the latter half of Life in the Wires is where the band finds their second wind and brings out the heaviest hitters, the biggest melodies, and the most expressive and angular songs across their whole discography. In fact, it's hard for me to think of a better run of songs this year than literally the entirety of the second disc. It ebbs and flows honestly quite brilliantly, never letting you get too complacent with the sounds it throws out, and the final two-hit combo of Life in the Wires Part 2 into their magnificent wind-down of Starting Fires is 20 minutes of your life that you'll want to relive again and again. It is absolutely glorious. Okay. For as much as I love that second disc, the first one took a lot longer for me to appreciate, feeling at times as if the band is, I don't know, occasionally meandering with their sounds, lacking the narrative finery and musical intrigue that defines disc 2. Now this isn't to say that the first half of the album is bad, far from it, it's taken a lot longer for me to actually appreciate. There weren't nearly as many truly outstanding wow moments for me. I mean, sure, Life in the Wires Part 1 and this House of Winter is a particularly meaty 1-2 punch, but I felt that things slowed down a little abruptly with tracks like Evaporator and Strange World. I like that the album does give the listener these moments of calm within the whirling storm of instrumental finery that surrounds them, but for my ears, I felt a little drawn out of the experience around here. The hype machine was dying down a little bit for me, and in truth, on my first couple of listens, I had started to wonder if the band had enough of interest to say in the hour or so of music that was still to play out. Now, obviously I can tell you that the answer is yes, absolutely, but I still feel that the band are playing things a little bit safe and close to their chest up until Idiot Box. I mean, after all, this is most definitely a Frost record, and most definitely carrying on with the torch that Day and Age picked up with. Now, of course, your mileage on this will vary, and I feel that, if you didn't really like Day and Age, then the first half of this album might lull you into a potential false sense of security, thinking that this is both a narrative and musical continuation point from that album, as it honestly is for the first 35 to 40 minutes or so. But it's what lies beyond that point that makes the album so interesting and worth sticking with. Of course, though, the big question I always ask myself for these kinds of albums where the running time crests over 50 minutes, which is, for my money, the perfect length for a prog album, is the extended running time truly worth it? Time is a very valuable commodity in this world. It is, after all, the only thing we cannot earn more of. So for a record to run to nearly 90 minutes, it has to make sense. It has to feel worth it and earned. Life in the Wires is worth it, but only just. I do still feel that the album could have used a little bit of trimming, Maybe, possibly, it could have been shaved down to fit onto a single disc, if I'm being completely honest with myself. There are some tracks where the instrumental noodling does go on a little bit longer than I'd like, and some tracks that I wouldn't really miss if they were shaved off completely. But ultimately, this is still some of the speediest 86 minutes of music I've experienced, and by that metric, the running time is definitely earned. At the end of the day, this is an incredibly approachable album that I think will do extremely well with both veteran fans and newcomers alike. So, what else can I possibly say about Frost's Life in the Wires? One thing I will say about this band is that every time they put out a new record, it's a massive event in my musical calendar. They are responsible for one of my favourite albums of all time, after all, and I always live in the hope that one day they'll reach for the heights of that album and perhaps, God willing, move past it to create a new gold standard for modern prog. But the truth is, for me, this album falls agonisingly close, but just can't quite grasp onto that much coveted mantle. Milliontown can breathe a sigh of relief, but in this race there is no shame whatsoever in coming in second. I don't know though, perhaps I've been a little hard on the album, and to judge it on its own merits rather than where it stands within the band's discography would probably be painting it in a much more reverent light. After all, if this is your first exposure to the band, I can see this as being an easy first place for you. It's got these broad, sweeping, bold statements of both defiant instrumentation and challenging narrative flow to make for an album that feels substantial and filling. I don't know, maybe in future this could very well be a desert island disc for me, if only for the sheer variety and depth of the music presented to you. It also feels that despite the length of time I've had with the promo and the number of times I've spun the album in the last few weeks, that I'm still only breaking the surface of what this record has to offer. I do still feel that a physical purchase is the best recommendation I can give you here. You get a heck of a lot of money for your buck, and it really does feel like this is an extremely well thought out and intricately planned and paced album. It just falls down a little bit from a slightly lumbering start, slightly flabby middle, and a feeling of perhaps slightly too much familiarity in its opening numbers. But ultimately, I will comfortably say that I absolutely loved my time with Life in the Wires, and it is an easy recommendation to just about anyone. This is all, of course, guys, just my opinion, so when this one drops on October the 18th, please do let me know what you thought about it in the comments down below. Please do drop me a thumbs up if you like the video, please do tell your friends all about little old me, and please do throw me a subscription if you're feeling particularly enamoured by my own inimitable style of music review. And until next time, guys, as always, keep your rhyme signatures pretty odd.